The preliminary NTSB report is out on the United Airlines hard landing of the 767 of United's Flight 702 in Houston, Texas, back on 29 July. Let's check it out. As a pilot and a mechanic who's seen a lot of damage to a lot of aircraft over the years, you begin to recognize some of the telltale signs of some of the types of damage you see on aircraft and can almost immediately identify what the cause of it is. For example, in light aircraft like the Cessna series or Cessna 182, when you see a big crease in the firewall like this, or a wrinkle just under the firewall towards the nose of the aircraft, you know that that aircraft has been bounced off of its nose gear or struck the nose gear hard, and what usually causes it to buckle this badly is a phenomenon called a PIO, or pilot-induced oscillation. That is a porpoising of the aircraft on landing with several hard strikes on the nose gear. It's a much more rare case when you see this in a large aircraft like a Boeing 767, but when one of these large aircraft is exposed to a PIO, or porpoise, it usually results in damage across the crown or the top of the fuselage, right up in this portion of the aircraft. As kids, we were first introduced to PIO watching these great old NASA films. Here's the F8 pilot-induced oscillation video from years ago. He conducts a smooth touchdown, and I think this is an intentional effort to get a PIO going. And there you see the pitching or oscillation of the aircraft. In this case, fortunately, he's gotten the aircraft away from the ground. A PIO, or pilot-induced oscillation, can occur on any axis of the aircraft. And flight test engineers and flight control scientists have gone to great lengths and years of effort and energy and mathematical calculations in order to prevent PIOs in flight control systems, especially under automatic flight control systems. But here's a good example of what a PIO looks like in an aircraft like a 767. This is ANA touching down on the mains and then bouncing the nose gear up off of the runway, and then the nose gear is going to drop again and bounce again and then land for a third time, and this will result in the creasing of the fuselage right at the top, right along in here, if you hit it hard enough. What causes a PIO? It's when you get behind the aircraft with the flight controls and the aircraft starts oscillating, and instead of stopping the oscillation, you are behind the sine wave of the oscillation and are enhancing the oscillation with your flight control inputs. Now, this is Ted Greenfield, who very bravely posted his own pilot-induced oscillation that he learned about while learning to fly in this Cessna 150, and he gives a great presentation, one of the best presentations I've seen on YouTube about this phenomenon. So coming in on a nice stabilized approach, touches down on the mains, bounces a little bit, and starts this PI. Now check out the flight controls. Did you see him coming in and out, in and out? That was a very small PIO, but this PIO can get very ugly very quickly and create a lot of damage to the aircraft. Here he slows down the video and watch his flight control inputs. See how he's exacerbating the PIO with the flight control inputs? The best thing to do is just pull the flight controls back, take yourself out of the loop of the PIO by pulling back on the controls and holding the nose up and keeping it off of the runway. Now that we've reviewed what a PIO is, let's go back to the NTSB preliminary report. On July 29th, 2023, about 10:34 Central Daylight Time, United Airlines Flight 702, a Boeing 767-300, sustained substantial damage when it was involved in an accident while landing at George Bush International Airport at Houston, Texas, with 202 passengers on board and crew were all uninjured. The flight was operating under a Part 121 flight. The flight crew reported that the first officer was the pilot flying and the captain was the pilot monitoring. Now, word on the streets, and yet to be confirmed, is this may have been an IOE flight, or initial operating experience flight, so it may very well have been a check airman in the left seat with a new pilot getting checked out in the aircraft in the right seat. The departure from Newark and the cruise segment of the flight were uneventful. Upon arrival at Houston, they were cleared the Doobie 2 arrival and the ILS-26 left approach. According to the flight crew, the airplane was fully configured for landing on speed and in compliance with the company's stable approach criteria, and the initial touchdown on the main wheels was normal. The FO stated that after the main landing gear touched down, he held aft pressure on the yoke to keep the nose wheel from hitting the runway. And this is something you do on these large aircraft. You have to physically stand by. Let me get my model out here. Once you touch down on the main wheels, you have to continue to fly the aircraft and gently lower or fly the nose wheel down to the runway to avoid it from pounding into the runway. The FO stated that after the main landing gear touched down, he held aft pressure on the control yoke to keep the nose wheel from hitting the runway. However, the nose wheel made contact with abnormal force. We'll look at those forces in a minute. The airplane appeared to bounce, so bam! And he reacted by pulling aft on the control yoke in an effort to keep the nose wheel from impacting the runway a second time. Subsequently, the speed brakes deployed and the auto brakes engaged, which resulted in a second bounce of the nose wheel. He deployed the thrust reversers and the plane began to decelerate. The captain assumed control of the airplane and the remainder of the landing gear or the landing rollout was normal with no risk of runway overrun or excursion. When the speed brakes come out on the 767, they can tend to induce a bit of a nose up pitching moment. When the auto brakes engage, they will induce a nose down pitching moment. And as a pilot, you know this and you are anticipating it with each landing as you are gently flying this nose gear down to the runway without banging it. A preliminary review of the FDR flight data recorder revealed that after the initial touchdown on both main wheels, the airplane rolled to the left and the right main gear lifted off the runway surface. Subsequently, the nose gear touched down with a gravitational force, a G of about 1.4 Gs, and bounced. That's substantial. The speed brakes deployed and the nose wheel impacted the runway a second time with a force of about 1.6 Gs, indicating that this PIO is getting worse, followed by another bounce. The right thrust reverser deployed and the nose wheel impacted the runway again with a force of about 1.6 G, followed by the deployment of the left TR. So that's at least 1, 2, or 3 kablamos on the nose gear, indicating a pretty solid PIO of the aircraft. A post-accident examination of the airplane revealed substantial damage to the crown of the upper fuselage as shown here. We look at the winds and the weather. 5 knots of wind at a 220 degrees on the wind heading, 30 degrees Celsius, and VFR conditions. So what becomes of the airplane? Well, I don't know. This is an older aircraft now. Will they go to the effort to repair this airplane? That you'd really have to rejig that whole fuselage and straighten it out. That's probably not financially feasible to repair this fuselage, at least there at United. Somebody else may want to take on the task, but that aircraft could very well be sent to the boneyard. As far as the crew goes, don't know. If you're in your first year of employment with the airlines on your IOE, you are generally considered a probationary pilot, so you don't have quite all of the union protections that a non-probationary pilot would have. So on that first year, if you're within that first year of employment, they can let you go a lot easier than once you are above in good standing with the pilot union after your first year of employment. So I don't know what happened to the first officer who was performing this landing. And as a matter of reference, in flight, the Boeing 767 has a positive 2.5 G limit, with the flaps up and a 2G limit, positive G limit with the flaps down. But that's in flight. Here's another look at that ANA hard landing from a slow motion viewpoint. And once again, that one also is a one-wheel landing that got this thing going. Boom! There goes the first kablamo off of the nose gear. The aircraft nearly bounces all the way up off the ground. Boom! A second kablamo on the nose gear, followed by a third kablamo. In that situation, it looked like the PIO oscillation was decreasing each time. So let's live and learn from these accident reports and investigations and not denigrate the crew members involved in this situation. Sometimes kablamo happens. Ask me how I know. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.